The cool thing about this whole project is how God is just helping everything happen. And we had talked about doing a seminar like this where we had some people talking about C.S. Lewis. And I was rushing to a meeting. I had to get lunch real quick, so I went to Panera. I'm sitting there, and a woman and her husband, they just look so friendly to each other. They're talking and they're reading. Then she decides she's going to pick out a new ring for her cell phone. So she's going through and she has it on full blast. Because I didn't know what to do with it. What do you think about this? And he's like, well, that sounds pretty good. What about this? Yes, very annoying. And then so she comes up to my table and she apologizes. She's like, I'm so sorry. I was trying to pick out a ringer that I can hear when it's in my purse. And I was like, that's okay. And then I started asking her where her accent was from. And then she started telling me about her husband. And my eyes just got bigger and bigger and bigger because she was like, oh yes, my husband taught the first philosophy course on C.S. Lewis at Asbury. He taught it for 50 years. He's taught courses all over the world, in Siberia, Colombia, at seminaries, at colleges. He has a discussion at the house with students about C.S. Lewis. We read C.S. Lewis to all of our children out loud. Each one, we've had 5 kids. And I was like, will you teach for us? And he's like, well, of course I will. I love this stuff. So we're so honored to have you. Thank you for taking time out of your day. Okay.
For that introduction, I can't wait to hear what I have to say. Then Brothers Karamazov. That was, I read that book at a summer camp between my junior and senior years in high school, and for years, and still regarded as one of the best books I've ever read. A person in Lebanon, Kentucky, you referred to, who had never been outside the county. That's almost like C.S. Lewis, except when he went on a trip with Joy, he had hardly been outside his own backyard. Yeah, of course, but he had traveled much. Well, a few things about Lewis, C.S. Lewis. He was Irish by birth, and most of his life in England, teaching in Oxford and Cambridge. He was a bit of a loner, private type person who didn't few close friends, but he became one of the best known names worldwide of the 20th century. Found in Siberia, they knew who C.S. Lewis was. He never cared much as an adult for the company of children, but he became the author of some of the best loved and most widely read children's books of this age, or perhaps of any age. And his children's books, the Chronicles of Narnia, are read and enjoyed as much by adults as by children. Lewis's view was this: a children's book is not a good children's book unless it is good for adults also. He's best known worldwide for 2 things: his children's stories and his rational exposition of and defense of Christianity. Chronicles of Narnia and Mere Christianity. I started reading Mere Christianity when I was somewhere in high school. I hadn't read a Christian book like that addressed itself to my rationality, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't put it down. Oh, I couldn't understand it. It was too hard. Since then, I had read it innumerable times and taught it many times and never got tired of it. Well, Lewis had a very logical mind, rational defense of Christianity, and a very intensely vivid imagination. In his early life, he once commented that as a youth he feared for his own stability because his imagination was so overwhelmingly powerful and vivid. Our book branches to heaven, the geniuses of C.S. Lewis. James Como says, Lewis is one of the great men of letters in the English-speaking world, not only in the 20th century, but ever. And in the introduction, the author says, Lewis had one of the most formidable minds of the century. He reads everything, and remembers everything he's read, said Louis Emerson. Austin Farrer, who knew Lewis, described him as a frontiersman, a pioneer. And he called himself a dinosaur. What about C.S. Lewis and Christianity? Just a very interesting question. Lewis is probably the most famous Christian of the 20th century. If it's not Billy Graham, then it would have to be C.S. Lewis. Was Lewis always a Christian? Of course, no. But he became a Christian as an adult. The change in his life was dramatic and decisive, but the turning point, the crossing of the line, was very unemotional and to all outward appearance, non-existent. It came in two stages. First, the self-satisfied atheist came to the conviction that there is God. All lines of argument led him in one direction, God. Well, that was okay, as long as God didn't bother him in any way. Lewis says that all things were disagreeable to him, all things that were disagreeable to him in life could be summed up in one word: interference. He did not want to be interfered with in any way. Herein lay his primary complaint about the Christian's God. He sounded to Lewis like a cosmic interferer. And yet he came to embrace that cosmic interferer as his own, and then to commend him winsomely and persuasively to millions of other people. How did that happen? Came after conversation with J.R.R. Tolkien about myth and reality and who Jesus Christ is. Lewis was riding on a bus. He simply said, when he got on the bus, he was not a Christian. When he got off the bus, he was a Christian. Anybody else have a testimony here like that? And now the whole world is a different place because of what took place on that bus. There are some people whose lives have been changed. Many people whose lives have been changed because of what took place on that bus, and you may be one of them. A little bit about his worldview, his thinking, his way of approaching things. He said, you must begin by admitting the self-evidence of logical thought, and then believe all other things only insofar as they agree with that. Well, wherein lie the truth credentials of rational thought? They lie in a characteristic we call self-evidence. Rational thought is to us self-evident. The basic steps of logic are themselves self-evidently valid. Things that are self-evident are by nature not conclusions, but premises. Something that is genuinely self-evident has its evidence within itself. And it shines by its own light, so to speak. We don't hear much or think much or base much on self-evidence today, it seems. In The Abolition of Man on page 53, Lewis speaks of things that are so obviously reasonable that they neither demand nor admit proof. And he says, if nothing is self-evident, then nothing can be proved. Here we are dealing with what Lewis calls rationality itself. Open-mindedness here is just idiocy, both in logic and in ethics. One place to look for what is self-evident to human beings is the grammar of all languages. The grammar of all languages will reveal what people, human beings as such, regard as self-evident. Certain elements of grammatical structure may be found everywhere in the world. Well, I was glad to have an opportunity to test that out in Siberia, one place, as well as a couple of different places in South America, and found that when they understood what he was saying, fully agreed. Educated people did. Now I have a few things from the book Jack, which is the best biography of Lewis, and deals particularly a lot with his early life. I have a few things about it that will say some things about it. In the preface, the author says, even after I had been taught by him for 3 years, it never entered my mind that he could one day become an author whose books would sell at the rate of about 2 million copies a year. Since he never spoke of religion while I was his pupil, or until we had become friends 15 years later, it would have seemed incredible that he could become the means of bringing many people back to the Christian faith. Astonishing, too, that this almost unknown academic should become a popular broadcaster whose talks would play a valuable part in sustaining British morale during the darkest hours of the war. I first heard the voice of C.S. Lewis by a friend's shortwave radio at Davidson College in North Carolina. And he spoke rapidly, without a whole lot of variety of emphasis. And very quickly he spoke, and it was what was to become the Four Loves. And very hard to follow. Not the book, but hearing him speaking the first time. At about the age of 4, he suddenly announced that his name was Jackson, and he refused to answer to any other. Shortened to Jack, this was the name by which he was always known by his close friends. And so, the book. The most important experiences of his childhood were mystical experiences of the presence of God, and he used the word joy to describe his experiences. He valued these experiences of joy more than anything else he had known. And he was surprised by joy. That's the name of his biography. And he spent the rest of his life searching for more of it. I had to say to you, the first recorded example of Jack's gift for repartee dates back to his return from a holiday. Jack flung himself into a chair and observed, I have a prejudice against the French. His father, who was doing something in that manner, said irritably, what? Jack, crossing his legs and putting his fingertips together, said, "If I knew why, it wouldn't be a prejudice." More than any other modern critic, he was sensitive to the music of poetry, the sound of the verse. And although he was intensely concerned with grammar and scansion, his technical analysis of a verse would always enhance one's appreciation of its beauty. When he went to school, while still in his growing youth, at Great Bookham, after another school at Malvern. At Great Bookham, as at Malvern, Jack led a double life. With one faculty of his mind, he was logical and rational, thanks to a man named Kirkpatrick, who had been an early teacher. With another faculty, he was intensely romantic. So romantic, in fact, that at times he feared his feelings would lead him into madness. The interesting relationship between the romantic and the rational. And while he was young, he made this remark, that the Christian God is a spirit more cruel and barbarous than any man. It wasn't his final word on the subject, gratefully, but that was his opinion at one point of his atheism. At Oxford University, not at Oxford and Cambridge, he was the only Oxford lecturer of the 30s and 40s to attract and hold large audiences. Kind of like I'm doing now. In his letter to his brother Warren of July 20th, 1940, he describes an idea for a book that became Screwtape Letters. It would be a book of letters of advice from an elderly devil to the young one who has just started to work on his first patient. The first thing to do is undermine his faith in prayer. And in this work of undermining faith, the younger devil should avoid arguments. Because arguments will only give rise to counter-arguments and thinking. And you don't want the person to be thinking, said the spirit devil to the younger devil. The important thing is to try to encourage in the patient the unreasoning feeling that the doctrines of the Christian faith are the sort of things that can't really be true. They're just that sort. So this would be interesting. He had resolved, even before the publication of the Pilgrim's Regress, to give to charity the money he received from the writing of religious books. And he kept to this undertaking, even at times when he was short of money. He wrote all his books in longhand. Do you? Do you write all your books in longhand? Not these days. From January 1942, his Monday evenings were devoted at Oxford to the meetings of the Oxford Socratic Club, in that Socrates, of course, of which he was the president, and for which he was responsible to the university. It was decided that Oxford badly needed an open forum for the discussion of the intellectual difficulties concerned with religion and with Christianity in particular. And so the Oxford Socratic Club was formed for this purpose. Because Jack, C.S. Lewis, was thought at one time to have been an atheist, which he was invited to be the president, and also the senior member of the university responsible for the club's good behavior, and without whom permission to form the society would not be granted. He accepted the role with great enthusiasm. This club is long overdue, he told its initiation. At each meeting, a paper would be read either by a Christian or an unbeliever. A speaker who held the opposing view would reply. The meeting was then thrown open to general discussion, which Jack usually began by delivering with enormous gusto an attack on some of the unbelievers' propositions. Jack's contributions were usually the high points of the evening. Often 80 to 100 undergraduates would be present, as well as some senior members of the university. As the second largest society in the university, the Oxford Socratic Club attracted some of the best and best known speakers in the country. And incidentally, Jack expressed his views not only for many years at Oxford, Christianity had been passively on the defensive. For the time being, Jack changed all that. He expressed his views not only at the Socratic Club, but also at dinner and in the senior common room afterward. This policy made him many enemies. Did that deter him? Not at all. He was sent a copy of The Control of Language by 2 schoolmasters, and the view horrified him. It seemed to destroy all human stability, and to dehumanize man as a rational being. He therefore jumped at the opportunity to campaign against this view when he was invited to give 3 lectures at Durham University. The lectures were published. None of the few reviewers of the first edition seemed to have realized its importance, and they must have been put off by the title, The Abolition of Man. Reflections on Education, with special reference to the teaching of English in the upper forms of schools. Now, however, it's generally seen as the most important pamphlet and the best existing defense of objective values and natural law, which he referred to as the abolition of man. Incidentally, Mortimer Adler, when he was doing Best Books of the Western World for his Encyclopedia Britannica, there he put The Abolition of Man as one of the best books in the Western world. In those days, he had a debate with Professor Anscombe, Elizabeth Anscombe, who was a prominent philosopher. When told later of the effect of the discussion on Jack, that he thought he had been defeated in his argument with Elizabeth Anscombe. And that he had been proved wrong. When told years later of the effect of the discussion on Jack, Professor Anscombe was surprised and upset. Oh dear, I don't think I agree that I won. All that I was doing was to argue as a modern philosopher academically. I was not expressing my deepest beliefs. But the debate had been a humiliating experience, but perhaps it was ultimately good for him. In the past, he had been far too proud of his logical ability. Now he was humbled. Logical positivism and linguistic analysis was gaining popularity, and it didn't seem to Lewis in the mainstream of classical philosophy, which is what he was interested in, to the degree that he was interested in philosophy. And he couldn't cope with these new developments and had no desire to do. They made what he regarded as philosophical thinking almost impossible. Don't worry, another couple hours and I'll be done. His method of writing stories. He said, I see pictures. Some of the pictures have a common flavor, almost a common smell, which groups them together. Keep quiet and watch, and they will begin joining themselves up. Chapter, talk about Narnia. In 1944, Jack had been engaged to write English literature in the 16th century, one volume of the Oxford History of English Literature. He did an immense amount of reading for this project because he refused to give an opinion on a book he had not read. And talking about the early part, the conclusion, the author concludes, all this and much more came in the first 60 pages. The controversy provoked by their brilliance has not yet died down. His method of traveling was unusual. He almost always arrived very early at Oxford Station because he never had a watch. I think he did. He disliked the idea of spending so large a sum of money on himself. He never bought a newspaper. There were better things with which to occupy the mind. I don't need to read the news. If anything important happens, far too many people are sure to tell you about it. When he was alone with a friend, they might read aloud together. He was convinced of the value of reading aloud. A couple more things here, but plenty, more or less. In 1954, he left Oxford for a teaching position at Cambridge. In his introductory lecture, he said, speaking not only for myself, but for all other Western men whom you meet, I would say, use your specimens while you can. There are not going to be many more dinosaurs. One undergraduate commented to me, says this author, we were overwhelmed by his vitality and enthusiasm. I had never heard a lecture anywhere near as exciting. We discussed it until far into the night. For weeks afterward, you heard people describing themselves as dinos. When he married Joyce, he had a couple children. He was extremely kind to the boys, but I do not think he enjoyed their company. Didn't care much for the company of children. When the publisher suggested the title for one of his books, Till We Have Faces, the phrase comes from a speech of Orwell at the beginning of the last chapter. The fox has just told her that the whole art of words is say what you really mean. I think that's a great line. The whole art of words is to say what you really mean. Till We Have Faces, and he said he thought Till We Have Faces was his best novel. Sometimes he thought Carlandra was. And the author says both are masterpieces, two of the most profound novels written in the century. Gave some talks that were never broadcast. 12 years, his 4 talks on love. The recordings are not an impressive performance. For one thing, they're spoken too fast. When I first heard Lewis on the radio, speaking from England, I was in North Carolina. One could hear him clearly, but he was so fast. For another, they sound like they are being read. We never feel that he is talking directly to us. And how I felt when I first heard him. Talking about friendship, he said the survival of Christianity depended on it. Friendship. Here's a good word for us all. Christ can truly say to every group of Christian friends, you have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another. That regarded as friendship and friendships for life. One point he said, in reading great literature, I transcend myself, and I am never more myself than when I do. What a great line. Never more myself than when I transcend myself. To the degree that that's true, what does that say about us human beings? It was hard to be much in Lewis's company without being aware of his goodness, even holiness. It was nourished by prayer, and he meditated daily on verses from the New Testament. And by his openness to mystical experience and his habit of communing with nature, he took his religious duties seriously, though without ever losing his glorious sense of humor. Many of you have what others would call a glorious sense of humor. Okay, the ones who laughed, I got it. His glorious sense of humor. And here I come to the last of these. It's worth remembering that an important part of his work, from the writing of the great academic masterpieces, The Allegory of Love, to Till We Have Faces, was a celebration or glorification of femininity. Who would ever have thought that about Lewis? Was a celebration of or glorification of femininity and romantic love. So, Jack. If you have questions, I don't know if we'll be able to find the page right away, but I respond to whatever you may say or ask. Yes.
Do you know what inspired him to write children's books?
Isn't that interesting? What inspired him to write children's books if he didn't enjoy the mission of children? Perhaps the imagination of children. Certainly.